Well, I want to welcome you to the Ripon Historical Society. This is a pretty big turnout, and I don't know if I can satisfy all your interests, but I'll try. It's nice to see that people are taking time out of their busy schedules to come to the Ripon Historical Society because it's your historical society. And we serve the public, and we serve the city of Ripon. And it's important that everybody that can comes to the Historical Society. We now have docents, and this Historical Society is open every day of the week from 10 until 1 in the afternoon. And if you have any pressing questions about anything, don't hesitate to stop in because we've trained our docents to be able to answer just about any question you could. I see there's a few of them here. If you don't know who I am, I'm Jack Steinbring, and I'm the president of this place, interim president at midnight on the 1st of January. I am going to be the vice president, and somebody else is going to take over. Big smile from the... And it's my turn to give the program tonight. And I'm going to talk about the village of Ceresco. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm from Ceresco. My family has all been from Ceresco forever. We live in a house that was built by the blacksmith of the Ceresco phalanx. My daddy was born in Ceresco. I was born in Ceresco, except I had to go to Oshkosh. My mother had complications. And so on. But anyway, my daddy was born in Ceresco. My granddaddy was born in Ceresco. And my great-grandfather lived in Ceresco, but he was born in Germany. So. The village of Ceresco is right in this area here. It was an agricultural commune, you might call it a commune, except that there were many elements of the Ceresco phalanx that were not communalistic. Firstly, people were judged on the basis of their product. If you did well, you got reimbursed more for it. If you didn't work well, you didn't get as good a pay. That's not really egalitarian. That's not the substance of communalism. Communalism is everybody is the same. You get the same pay, you get the same housing, you get everything the same. Not with the Ceresco phalanx. That was a totally different operation. It was based on an economics professor by the name of Fourier. And it was largely an agricultural commune or communal system, so that everyone did his part. And for his part, he was rewarded. Well, at the height of the Ceresco phalanx, the property covered 1,261 acres. That's a pretty substantial piece of ground.
No, that doesn't get off that show.
Everybody bought a share. In order to be in the phalanx, you had to buy a share. But also, you were vetted. They just didn't let everybody into it. And I think the reason for that is that it was a closed community. And a closed community had certain goals. And one of the most significant goals, kind of a humanitarian goal, was the abolition of slavery. And a closed community like this, if it were really interested in abolition, would at that time have to be quite secret. because the fugitive slave law had already been put into effect, and the penalties for harboring a slave were horrendous. You could lose all your property. It didn't happen very often, but that was the rule. And so what could be a more efficient way of keeping something like that secret? Well, a closed community could do it, and Ceresco did. This is the president of the Phalanx. Chase is a New Englander, and he came with the formation, which actually happened at Southport, Wisconsin, which is now Kenosha. They had something, some kind of a forum where people could get together and listen to lectures and debate the issues of the day. And communalism was one of the experiments in society that was going on at that time. And Warren Chase was an active member of that discussion group, and they decided in the spring of 1844 to find themselves a piece of land and start up a Fourierite community. So in the early May in 1844, 19 men and a boy came up here to the Silver Creek and Crystal Creek Valley to explore and find a place that they liked. And they did like this place, and so this is where they settled. They had communal housing, and this is not the first of the longhouses. You may think so, but no. It's probably the third and possibly the fourth. Well, the reason for that is that I believe at least part of the longhouse in 1846 either burned to the ground or at least was very badly damaged and then was repaired. So it's almost a case of there being four of them. This is the first school, and this is the stone school, presumably. It may or may not be true. This is in the archives of the Ripon Historical Society, and it was built. It is certainly the first school in this whole entire area, and they later on became a district. But this school, if that's it, had to house not just the school children, but it served as a church and the meeting hall for the officials of the Ceresco Phalanx, which met very regularly, some parts of it once a week, others monthly. And that puts some strain on a building like that. But that's what it served, that's what was done with it. Later on I'll have a picture of where I think it was. We can't be perfectly sure, but it was on Church Street, and that was the church, so maybe that made. This is the house of one of the most famous of the Cerescoites, a man by the name of Edward Daniels. And Edward Daniels became a colonel commanding the 1st Wisconsin Cavalry that was formed on Ripon College campus. And this house also, because Daniels was a vigorous abolitionist and got in cahoots with his, some friends of his, and got involved in the Booth War. In fact, you could say Lafarge, was it? Lafarge? Anyway, it was hatched. The Booth War was hatched in Ceresco. And Edward Daniels was one of the instigators. I put this picture in, I'll put a couple more of them, but a lot of us don't probably remember or realize that the mill pond in the west end of town was located on the north side of West Fond du Lac Street, and the mill race, taking from the dam right here, and fed water down the mill race to the mill. And when I was a kid, my daddy taught me rabbit hunting. And where we went rabbit hunting was along this mill race. There was an Octagon school that was located on Park Street, right about here. What does it say? This Cedar. It would have been right about here. And that had been torn down in the 1930s. And so we went rabbit hunting in there. It's all growing over. Okay, another thing. This is where the Longhouse was located on Church Street. Okay, Church curves and it goes out to Liberty. But the first of the Longhouses was something close to 300 feet long, if you can imagine that. And it occupied really most of the length of Church Street as it connects to Union Street, which would be about right here. And the first of the Longhouses was a collection of buildings that was located on the corner of Church and Warren. And they referred to it as a longhouse, but it was really 3 or 4 different buildings put together. And part of that, this part right here, I'm sorry, but part of that still exists in a house on the corner of Church and Warren. It's the bakery was located in one of the, and the mill, the kiln, the ovens are still in there. Here's some more pictures of the mill pond and the mill race. And yeah, what I wanted to tell you, Ceresco was a hub, and a very critical hub too, because it connected to many other communities. And so you had the road to Fond du Lac, the road to Berlin, the road to Green Lake, which was then called Dartford here, and to Watertown, this one here. So you have a hub of 5 major roads leading to other communities. And what that does is it gives you incredible communication to all of those places. And so people knew a lot about what was going on just because of where they lived. One of the examples of that would be Jacob Woodruff, who built the house that we live in, the Octagon house. He was a blacksmith, and it was curious that he built an octagon. Why would you do that? And how would you know about it? Well, one of the things was that, well, the New York Tribune had promoted the idea of octagonal architecture, partly because of a guy by the name of Orson Squire Fowler, who reinvented octagons in the 1840s. And he claimed that they were conducive to harmonious life. And there were any number of experiments that were going on at that time in the middle 1800s, and anything that would be conducive to harmonious life sounded real good. Here's the Watertown Road in a later map showing where it went across West Street and up the hill and out that way. John Splitt and I walked the length of the Watertown Road from Dartford to Liberty Street. It was still quite visible at that time. I don't know if it is anymore, but we did that. And Goodrich, Joseph Goodrich was a innkeeper in Milton, Wisconsin. And in 1845, Joseph Goodrich invented grout, or an American form of concrete. And he poured a hexagonal building there to be used as a temperance inn. Yep, true. And I think Jacob Woodruff found out about that through these many connections. And that's why he built an octagonal one of the same stuff. when the books were written about octagonal architecture and the construction with grout, they were done by Orson Squire Fowler in the 1850s. So they were after the Milton House and also the octagons in Ripon, and also there's one near Brandon. All these were quite early. There was a notice in the archives that said all of the original documents on the Ceresco phalanx had been shipped to Madison. That's an original, and there's several more. They date from 1844. Yep. And this one here I think was 1851, but I'm not sure. But anyway, there's these are all part of the organization of the phalanx, so that would date to 1844. And they're still here, many of them. Didn't get to Madison. We didn't give them up. Okay, I don't know what's next year. Okay, there's your date, 1845. And that's a handwritten original document. And that is in our archives. So I don't know what went to Madison, but that one didn't. One of the things about the phalanx that a lot of people really don't realize is that the first mill was not a grist mill. The first mill had to be, because of the necessity, was a lumber mill. Now, why would that be? Well, it's because they had a lot of oxen, like maybe 50. Yeah. And the first year, which was a very cold year, they were more concerned with protecting their animals than they were the people. That's true. And so right away, they had to build accommodations for their animals, horses, cows, but mainly oxen, because they were the brute force. Those were the real heavy machinery of that era. And I once estimated the number of buildings that were in the Ceresco phalanx, and I came up with a number of 50. So we don't know an awful lot about the actual physical characteristics of the Ceresco phalanx. It was a much bigger spread of buildings and activities than the sterile kinds of historical writings you get in your hands. Here's the early district, the first school district in our whole region, and I guess that date is 1855. And I'm not sure, but I think this is the phalanx in here. But animals came first, and of course some of the descriptions of living in Ceresco in 1844 emphasized the cracks in the walls and the wind whipping through them and snow getting through into it as well. And this was not a happy time. The first year was a pretty rough year. But within 2 years, they were harvesting 20,000 bushels of wheat. 20,000. That's almost unbelievable. I wonder if you could get that now with heavy equipment, but that's what they did. Another one of these that shows the mill race in the mill. Our family.
Shows our house on there too. Shows our house on there too.
Yeah. Where's Liberty? Here we are.
Right
There we are.
there it is.
Yep, and it even had the L on it at that time. Yeah, and there's another one on State Street, which is right here. That is also an octagon. called the Inkwell House. It was built by Warren Chase in 1853. And interestingly, Chase being an abolitionist, the word is that he harbored escaped slaves in his house. He also conducted seances there, and I think it's called the Inkwell House. I think a lot of people call it the Inkwell. This is where the Longhouse was. This is on Church Street looking south, and this was Edward Daniels' house, the one that was demolished for the practice for the Ripon Fire Department. So they burned her down, and the basement was filled in with it, and this house was built on top of that. So much for the heritage sensitivity of our city fathers. Okay. Now, what was I talking about? Okay, well, almost 300 feet would take up all of the south side of Church Street, practically. And if part of it burned down, well, okay. Yes, and this house is on the northwest corner of Church and Warren, and I'm told that in the basement, part of the oven of the original Phalanx bakery is in it still. I haven't seen it. I guess Jeff Quilter saw it, though. Somebody knows that for sure? Okay. If I were conducting an archaeological excavation to yield more information on the Ceresco Phalanx, I would dig up this guy's front yard. And believe me, it would be very productive. That would be a very, very good thing to do. The Longhouse at this time is right to your right, over this way. I don't know how it got to have one privately owned part and then the rest of it communalistic. I don't know, some strange phenomenon there. Now, this is looking north toward Park Street, right there. This is on Liberty, and this is where the Ceresco School stood until 1995. And this is an excavation of a basement there, and it is an archaeological site. It's a thin one. It just covers the top, maybe, if you're talking inches, probably 6 inches, something like that. But it's rich, and there was a tremendous number of artifacts recovered from it. What they did not reflect was a school. There was hardly anything, maybe little pieces of slate, you know, that the kids took to write their getting their handwriting stuff on. But anyway, I would have talked on that a little longer, but this is important. There are very few Aboriginal artifacts recovered from any of the archaeological sites in Ripon. There are 13 of them altogether, and this is an Aboriginal artifact. This is a section of a steatite pipe. You won't see that very often. I've seen a few of them, and I've seen them in the field, and I've collected them from northern Ojibwa Indians. Now this is not northern Ojibwa, but it is Algonquian. So it's either Fox or Sauk or Menominee, some Algonquian-speaking group, because this is classical monitor-style steatite pipe. In a minute, I'm afraid to didn't have to. Okay, it's this section right here. That's what that is. And so it's a perfect representation, except that we don't have the bowl, but never mind that. It's this style. These are two different ones. These are northern Ojibwa. I collected these many, many years ago. And they're authentic. Most of the time you see them pitch black. And you saw the other one. It was not pitch black. It was gray. Okay. Now, the reason for the reason for the black is not that it's a black stone, but because somebody has put shoe polish on it, or stove blackening, which is not, it's still used in the north, and that's what these are. They're steatite pipes, which were originally gray, but they've got shoe polish rubbed into them. This is the north end of the present longhouse. It's still got the return eave. It's got the radial window. I noticed that there was a, what we call an Adams surround, probably be the central entrance. But that seems to have gone away. I did see it, and it was in some pictures, but I guess that's been changed. It would reflect the time. It would be like 1850 would be a very good date for the Adams surround. You'll see one in our house, and you'll see them on quite a few of the houses up here in the north east end of town. We're going to look at the back of it in a minute, but any area around here would all be an archaeological site, and it could be excavated still. This is the back of the Ceresco Longhouse, and this is the construction of a parking lot at one of the most productive of the archaeological sites in Ceresco, which was from the back of the Longhouse. That's where people threw their junk. And archaeologists are crazy about junk, just love it. And some of them like privies too. I joined that group. But anyway, we got a lot of artifacts out of here in a salvage operation that Dr. Jeff Quilter managed from Ripon College. And there were a large number of artifacts recovered. We have a few more pictures of that. The depth of the deposit probably was more than a foot in depth, and it would be solid packed with artifacts. This is the salvage crew that came mostly from the Ritzenthaler chapter of the Wisconsin Archaeological Society at Oshkosh. And they came over as volunteers, and they helped Dr. Quilter. I can't say it's excavation. It's not excavation because this is just destroyed. The site was basically destroyed. And we're only, picking up the pieces and trying to learn as much as we can from them. So it's kind of a dicey business. But anyway, these are rockers, screens, and you work them this way, and all the dirt falls on the ground, and the artifacts stay in the screen. And that's what I'm doing right now over at Waterloo, Wisconsin, where I've been digging a site for the last 9 years. Count them. This is Rose Farber. This is Dick Mason, president of the Ritzenthaler chapter. And this is Jeff Quilter, a much younger Jeff Quilter now. But these are the people most interested and instrumental in the salvage archaeology that went on at the Ceresco Phalanx in 1995 because of the introduction of new gutters and sidewalks and new wiring and new plumbing and all that without any reference. Of course, at that time we did not have a preservation commission in Ripon, so we did what we could. And
It was earlier than 95. It was like
Might have been.
91 or 92.
okay, whatever. It was yeah, early in the 90s maybe. Oh, this is the richest site in Ceresco. Doesn't look like an awful lot, but it is. This was the village refuse dump, and it was a deep pit into which they were throwing everything. And if one of your nice flow blue vessels was cracked, you threw it away because they were that cheap. We look at them now and they're magnificent, beautiful. wish I had more of them. But that site was half outside this garage and half inside it. And the half that was outside it has been excavated and reported on by Dr. Quilter, and the other half is still there underneath the concrete floor. Now, this is Church Street, and it makes a bend, and it goes out to Liberty Street. The school, presumably, was right about in here. That was the earliest school, one that served many, many purposes. And was the forerunner of the district school. You saw the district plan, and also the construction of another school later on in 1857. Well, it wouldn't call it the Phalanx, but the community of Ceresco, which lived on past the Phalanx dissolution, built that school on the north side of Park Street, and it was octagonal and made of early American concrete, when we call it grout. This is the grout. It's laid in tiers, and there are 20 of them, and that means you have to have 20 dry days. You can't be putting these things up and letting it rain on it at all times. So it took 20 dry days to put up 20 of these tiers. This house was built by the blacksmith of the Phalanx, Jacob Woodruff. It was built in 1850, and it was bought by my daddy in 1906. So it's been in the family longer than the guy that built it. There's not much more you can say. Oh, okay, this is, we conducted an archaeological excavation of the premises here in 1995, right?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. This is a big slab of limestone which was laid up over the well. And underneath this we found a well that was hand laid, and may well have been made by the last surviving soldier of the Iron Brigade. Yeah. And he lived, what, about 4 houses away. Yeah. So that's a pretty neat thing. Yeah, it's stone laid. We'll see. This is not it. Or is it?
Yeah, it looks like.
No, this isn't it. This is probably the privies. And the privies were rich and probably still are. I haven't dug all of them. When you have a house that's been occupied for 150 or 160 years, most of that time being before plumbing, you had privies out in the backyard. And I would estimate that there'd have to be at least 6. We've only dug, I think, part of, well, maybe 3. 2 and a part of another. So that, and rich, yes, I think, they throw away the bottles, for example, and we got bottles that tell you that the pharmacy was in Ripon, and you can get the dates on those. Here's some of them. Pretty bad picture, though. But these would be some of them. Some were in the 19th century. Some earlier stuff with molten tops. They might have been parts of what we call they're square bottles, and they're called case bottles. And case bottles fit into little cubicles in a case. So there's maybe a dozen square openings that you can set them into. And the reason for that is that if you're taking them on a canoe voyage, right, they're better protected. They won't be just jostling each other and you're going over rapids and stuff like that, and some of the early voyagers use these routes. This is just another of the many ceramic shards that come up in these excavations. This would be definitely a Ceresco thing. One of the sites that is incorporated into the report on Ceresco is something called the Lindley Lane site. It goes from the upper campus of Ripon College to the lower campus. And along that, there's a little creek on the south side of the sidewalk. And that creek actually is loaded sometimes with artifacts, or has been. Now they're pretty well picked over. But it's the reason they're in there is because there was a huge community refuse pile that was covered over by the sidewalk, and this gets eroded into the creek over when you have a rapid flow, a big velocity flow. And this is one of the handles that came from that. And you may say, well, it's mother's trunk from the attic. This is a coffin handle. And for some reason, if any of the gravestones get busted and they can't be repaired, or nobody wants to repair them, or we forgot who that was, where did it end up? In Lindley Lane site. There are dozens still pieces of gravestones that are lying around in that trough, in that channel. And some of them have writing on them. Some of them have had writing on them. And what I couldn't figure out was they had some of these really nice limestone carved benches, and they're curved. They're a crescentic shape. And I couldn't allow that to happen, so Billy Hutton and I, we got a wheelbarrow and we pushed one of those benches all the way to my house, and it's sitting in my backyard next to a big old oak tree. This is called transfer wear. You probably all know about transfer wear. They put a slip and then fire the slip with a decoration on it on each of the vessels. And these are all from Staffordshire in England, and they date from the 19th century. You can get some as early as the 1790s because we have what we call an heirloom effect. An heirloom effect is that families keep their stuff, and if they don't get busted, I mean, 50, 100 years after they were made, they're still in the family. And I'll bet you most of you have got stuff that has come down the line. This is hand painted. I don't know what vessel that is, but it's polyhedral, whatever it may be. But heirloom effect will screw up the archaeologist because it's not the date that it's in context. You see, if you've got a date, say, of 1860 for a refuse deposit, and you find something in there, and you go to research it for its timing, you discover that it's way off the time that you assign to that particular deposit. So it can be a problem. Actually, I can tell you, in many cases, within 1 day of when some of this Staffordshire ware was made, because we have records of much of it that go back 200-300 years, and we can use that. This is one that everybody knows. Of course, this is willow ware. It's cobalt blue. It's a transfer print. If you got the earliest one, you'd be dealing with something about 1790. It's been made every year since then till right now. You can probably still buy it in the stores. It's a Chinese garden and with pagodas and all that. You never miss it because of its color and the little fences and things, stonework. But one piece like that, it tells you everything. Here's one that we can date because we know the manufacturer's name. That's real clear, Paul and Bishop. And you go through the trademarks for Paul and Bishop, and you will find this specific one. They might have 20 through the years. They've changed a lot. But this particular one, 1876 to 1878, 2 years. So you're dating that to within 2 years. That's pretty good. And that was Lindley Lane, yeah. Staffordshire Potteries, yes. Hanley, that's one of the Staffordshire communities. There are probably, oh, I don't know, maybe 15, 20. There's quite a few. The one thing that's good about ceramics like this is they're indestructible. Nothing can destroy them. Now here's another one, Johnson Brothers, very common name. This is semi-porcelain, 1900. And we know that because this particular trademark was only used in that one particular year. So it's a real telling thing. I think that's a number 2 right there, and that even pins it down that much more. It's the books are mostly by a guy by the name of Godden, Godden, are profuse, very detailed. If you get the biggest one, it's about I'd say 4 inches thick. And if you can't find it in there, forget it. It's a device that you use in archaeological interpretation. Here's Steve Clive, and 1875 to 1880. This particular trademark. That was an easy one too. And again, Tunstall, one of the many communities in Staffordshire, which is kind of like a province, a region, yeah. Most of the time, you can get 500 of these sherds and not get a trademark. It's very rare that you get them, but we've been very lucky. The Lindley Lane site has had a lot of them. All of the Ceresco sites. Let me see how many we've got. We've got 45 Union Street. We've got the back of the Longhouse, and we've got my house. We've got the southeast corner property of Liberty and Cedar. It's called the Liberty Cedar House. Oh yeah, this is 1912. So you can see that there's some that are much more recent than the 19th century ones, and they go right on up to recent times. So it's not a big surprise. Yeah, let's see what. Oh yeah, well the Ceresco school site. What I was saying before was that we didn't have very much in the way of the artifacts that reflected school life. Like, we didn't have any marbles. We didn't have much in the way of school slates. Oh, this is full blue. I'll talk about that in a minute. So why was this? You know, why were we not getting stuff that reflected the school as an institution and with all the activities associated with it? And the reason for that is that was not from the school. Prior to the construction of the several schools in that area, there was a very large Victorian house on the corner of Union and Liberty, the northeast corner of Union and Liberty. I'll show you a picture of that a little bit. This is Flo Boo, and it did start up in the very early 1800s. It's not a good example of it, but it is an example of it. It's named that because of this kind of a flow pattern of the cobalt pigment Okay, that's one that is often found. This is a applied lip and top to a previously mold-made glass bottle. And these are early. If you find something like this with this applied molten top, you're probably looking at late 18th century. This would be probably characteristic of the late 1700s. And we do get that in the Ceresco sites. Again, this is probably part of a one of these case bottles. It looks to me as though it probably was a squarish shape to it, and that probably fit into a case. Spackleware, that's another one you see a lot of, and it begins in the early 1800s, and it's a pretty rare stuff, quite distinctive. The most artifacts came from the refuse pit in the beneath the garage at 45 Union Street. Okay, let's see if we can get that thing going a little faster.
Do you want the clicker?
Yeah, I'll give it a try. Okay, it'll work. Yep. That's some nice, cobalt was used extensively for blue coloring for 100 years or more. In 1950, it became illegal because it was radioactive, and it was stopped. People were dying of cancer, worked in the factories that produced it. But it was commonplace in all of the ceramics that went up to that point in time. And some of the more beautiful, the two on the left here, okay, that didn't work. They're called pictorials. And there are whole books that show you what they are. A lot of them are Italian. Because there was a fascination with Italian architecture, and during the 1850s and on, a lot of the pictorials on these vessels were hand painted with a, and here's another of these. That's how much, you know, if you've got that much, you can find out stuff about it. Here's another pictorial, kind of a nice one. And, okay, this is the southeast corner. It was. Let's see if it goes back. That was the southeast corner of Cedar and Liberty. Southeast, yes. And that was a very rich site. The house burned down, and so it was rebuilt, and they dug a basement there, and they smashed through the archaeological site, and we salvaged as much as we could. And there was quite a lot from that site. I think this is, yeah, this is some of the stuff that came from that site. All right. Now the reason, let's see if we got this right. Yes. Yeah. This is the house at the corner of, nope, that's State. This is the one, okay? That's a pretty big house.
It's not, your clicker isn't working.
Yeah, okay. There's a very substantial Victorian house here. This is in 1867, so it was earlier than that. And this would be roughly where the Ceresco School was, right about here. And that's why we're getting all of that domestic refuse. It's because that isn't from the school, it's from this Victorian house that was built on the corner of Union and Liberty. And that is a substantial building, and the yield from that site is, yeah, okay. Uh-huh, yeah. Ah, ooh, boy. Uh-huh. Ah, okay. This is a Ceresco school from 1857. It's made from grout. I can't see the lines in it, probably because the pictures are rather poor. But there were people that remember people in this picture, and Doris Fox is one of those. Her mother was in this picture. She's donated quite a lot of stuff to the Ripon Historical Society. Lived here, was born and raised here, and her mother and my mother were very close friends. My daddy went to this school, but after this picture, because it became a German school, and he took classes there up through 5th grade. And then he became orphaned, and he had to go to work. He was age 12. I wrote his biography last year, and there's a copy here in the Historical Society. Anybody wants it? This is what was built in place of the Victorian mansion. This burned down in 1912. And then after it came the Dutch Revival Ceresco School, the brick school we all remember. I went to it, my 2 brothers went to it, and I guess everybody in Ceresco and farther afield than that went to this school. And that's it. That's looking at it, I think that's looking at it from the west side. Because the front part, is that right? No.
South side.
That's the south side, yeah, right, it's the south side, yeah. And then it'll be a equally, bilateral symmetry. You'd have this over on the other side, but can't see it. But anyway, that's it. And it was, this is when it was demolished. I have a reason for showing that. Okay, try that again. Same problem, right? Right. Okay, that's when it was demolished in 1995, or thereabouts. And this was part of the demolition. This is a cupola, 8-sided. Located on the top of it, actually a ventilator, but it was a kind of remembrance of the octagonal school that preceded it. And that's my friend Billy Hutton, and the workers at the site were going to put it in the landfill, and I decided, nah, let's haul that someplace, even in my backyard, and we did. And I laid a concrete slab under it, and it's still there as a reminder that it's from the old Ceresco school. So it didn't go into the landfill. Now, okay. Oh, okay, this is today. And the Ceresco octagonal school is located right here. At the junction of Cedar and Park, on the north side of Park. And that was a jungle when my daddy took me rabbit hunting there. Number 16 Union Street. This is the post office. The post office for the Ceresco Phalanx. And it actually was, I can remember the guy's first name. His first name was Lester. Anyway, he was the secretary of the Ceresco Phalanx, and he kept that job, actually all the way from Southport on up to the dissolution of the Phalanx, which time he went to Amro. Don't know why, but I guess he liked it there. So anyways, I think that's the last picture I've got. Beautiful. See, there was a Adam surround in either this one or this one. It had 3 windows down the sides, and that's what you'll see in front of our house, except there are 5 windows. And that's called an Adams surround. And that was characteristic of the 1850s. I had a lot of houses. There's one on the way to Rosendale. It's quite a nice one. I imagine you've got some questions because we did have kind of a mix up there with the electronics. So I'll try.
Phalanx dissolved. When was the phalanx dissolved?
1840, the end of 1849 and into 1850.
So when was it first settled?
1844.
Oh, it didn't last long. It didn't last long then.
No, but it was extremely successful economically. One of the main problems, there were a lot of problems, but one of them was that these people came from New England and they were farmers. And eating at the communal table was not a pleasant thought. They didn't like. Oh, I didn't turn it off. Okay. Yeah. You can't tell independent-minded New England farmers to all eat at the same table at the same time with the same this or same that. It later on became a problem. And so people began to want their own house. They wanted to cook in their communal tenement. And this kind of started to put some cracks into it. Another thing that put cracks into it was the fact that they were too successful. And the reason for that, the reason for the problem arising from that was that they did not have enough people to harvest the crops. They only had 200 at the best, and it's dropped to 120. And who's going to harvest these crops? We haven't got enough people to do it. They had to hire people to harvest and to put in the crops. So that started to make a crack in it. But there's another curious coincidence. There's something else that went on in 1849. The gold rush. And these people were so crazy about the gold rush that they appealed to the council for a horse and buggy to go to California. And the council approved it. And the guy went, his name was Sanborn. He went to California with a borrowed rig from the Phalanx. That's just one of them. There were several others that did as well. That was another crack in it. Yeah.
So didn't some of the people end up going to Berlin? I mean, you have a
Yes.
Ceresco Street
Yeah.
in Berlin.
Yeah. Trying to remember the name of the family. It was what's the name of the park up there in Berlin? Strong. It was a Strong family, and they invented Berlin. Yeah. They left in 1846. I wrote a paper on it called Ceresco Defectors. And it was the first of them to defect. Yes.
When the first schoolhouse was built, you said it had multi-purposes. It was a school, there was also the meeting room, and also was the church. What was the primary religion of the thing?
This is interesting. They didn't have any specific religion in the Phalanx. They were happy with all of them. So they'd have Congregational, Baptist, Presbyterian, didn't matter. Whoever happened to be handy. And they'd come and deliver their sermons. And they were very religious people. I mean, not to put them down in any way.
So to the best you know, there wasn't a minister or as part of the Phalanx movement or activity then. They didn't have their own pastor or priest or
No.
chaplain or anything.
No,
Okay.
but there were some that later on served this community in Ripon that were derived from that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Could you speak about the relationship between the Ceresco Phalanx and how it sort of gave birth, or, Ripon was developed? I mean, did Ripon have any Phalanx?
Yeah, Ripon, you're getting into it, issues. you want to remember that the Ceresco phalanx was to a person abolitionist. They hated the thought of slavery and always had, because the movement, even starting in Southport, had this as one of its qualities. There was a war that went on between Warren Chase, the president, who was an ardent abolitionist, and a man by the name of David P. Mapes. Now, David P. Mapes liked to be called Captain David P. Mapes because he once owned a tugboat on the Erie Canal. That's his claim to captaincy. Well, the phalanx people were ardent abolitionists, and David P. Mapes wasn't. He was a slave supporter. Yes, he was. He voted for the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which would extend slavery into these states. That was one of the things that brought on the Civil War. But in his book, if any of you would care to read it, you will find out that he says explicitly that the wrong side won the war. It's right in there, in print, and he wrote it. The last night before the Civil War, the 1st Wisconsin Cavalry formed at Ripon College under Colonel Daniels, went down and got a hold of his printing press, which he had been writing articles in support of the Kansas-Nebraska bill, and trashed it on what we now call Watson Street. Busted it all up. And I guess it's probably poetic justice in a way. He went on very quickly to found another city called Winneconne. He was persona non grata in Ripon, because Ripon had become abolitionist as well. And he was already not at the forefront of feeling in the upper town of Ripon. There were already many that were ardent, well, I wouldn't say ardent abolitionists, but in favor of abolition. And this is why the Republican Party was formed. It was an abolition party. And it was done here, and it was done by the upper part of the town. Ceresco people certainly participated in it. One of them being the guy that built our house, Jacob Woodruff, who was on one of the initial signatories of the formation of the Republican Party. And we think he probably harbored slaves in our house as well.
There's no way to prove it.
Okay.
Jack, there were rumors that they practiced free loves.
There have been so many articles written to debunk that idea that I couldn't list them all. And most of them are in the prestigious sources like the Wisconsin Journal of History and a lot of others. That is absolute bunk. If anything, the Ceresco people were, well, they had some blue laws which were bluer than blue. They would make the Staffordshire blue pottery disappear. I think less than 2 months after they settled in Ceresco, they agreed on these blue laws. No drinking, no swearing, no hanky-panky. Anything that you could imagine was in it. And they would not allow anybody to come into the phalanx as a member unless they vetted that person. And they really investigated anybody that wanted to get into the phalanx. Even though they were really hard up for people in the latter stages, they still held by this. So,
Was there a jealousy between the new community of Ripon and the Ceresco phalanx? I mean, was that the genesis of those
battle
rumors?
between Chase and Mapes. And Mapes did everything he could to downgrade these phalanx. He made all kinds of very vicious accusations of them, and they were all untrue. And he wanted to get the community centered in the upper part of town in Ripon, and of course he succeeded in doing that. And the phalanx, the Ceresco as a community, largely disappeared. But the community stayed many years afterwards as a town. And they didn't have a post office, but they still had their town. And I think that went through quite a few, several generations anyway, and a lot of us still live there. Yeah.
Warren Chase, wasn't he kind of you had mentioned somewhere in the beginning of your talk that he was holding seances. Wouldn't that kind of give you a clue of his...
He was what?
He was holding seances?
Yeah, that was one of the...
But he was rather
he did
bizarre.
that after, though. That wasn't necessarily while he was in the phalanx. That was after he built his house on Liberty Street in 1853. State Street in 1853. But yeah, he was a man of many parts.
He was a slave, so you can understand him.
Well, there was other crazy things with the reading the bumps on your head.
Yeah,
phrenology.
yeah, phrenology. So he was, yeah, he went in for, they all went in for phrenology. They had phrenological courses that they were conducted at the Ceresco phalanx. So somebody would lecture about the bumps on your head and how you could read those and interpret the person's character on the basis of the configuration of their brain case. Yeah. And don't forget the guy that reinvented the octagon, Orson Squire Fowler, was in fact a phrenologist, and he published the American Journal of Phrenology. And that would follow because there were connections between New York, where Fowler lived, many connections, and the phalanx population. And so his support of the whole idea of phrenology, and of course it was widespread at that time anyway, and then of course the business of spiritualism, as you say, you know, we can communicate with the spirits of our dead departed, and that was commonplace, and they did have discussions of that. But eventually, when Chase moved to State Street, then he did conduct seances in that house, but he also harbored slaves. In the upper part of it. I think there is a connection between the Underground Railroad and the octagonal architecture, because a lot of times we see them in Underground Railroad centers. And I can rattle off, I think about a half a dozen of them in Wisconsin. And I think that applies to our house as well. So there's something there as well. Yeah.
The Wisconsin phalanx being Feuerite, I mean, there were phalanxes across the country in the 19th century inspired by Feuer.
Yes.
Was there any kind of like interaction among the phalanxes?
Well, there was in a way because they had a direct pipeline to the New York Tribune. And this was a paper that advocated all movement out to the West and the new ideas that were being fostered in the American culture at that time. And so they shared. They would send reports to the Tribune. And there was a magazine or journal called The Harbinger, which carried the reports, and there were reports from many other phalanxes around the United States. I don't know how many there were originally, not that many, but there certainly were a number of them.
Was there intermingling between the townspeople so like of Ripon and the Phalanx people?
Not much.
But they had all these crops and they didn't have that many people, did they not?
Well, Ripon was a sort of
Come down and buy?
a mercantile community. It had a lot of stores, and it wasn't really what you'd call, and a college had evolved here. And it wasn't really what you'd call an agricultural town. It became more of an agricultural town in time, but not then. And I think that would be one of the reasons. They couldn't draw from this population to aid them in their agricultural pursuits, yeah. Well, okay.
Well, I'll just make personal comments. We purchased tore down an old house next to us down on Cedar Street. And yes, there was a well, hand dug, about 18 feet down, laid up with stones.
Yep.
Limestone, what, 15, 18 years ago, the city, and I guess with help from the DNA, made us fill it up.
Yeah.
They stood there as we filled it with sand and clay. Up till that time, I'd covered it with 2 layers of 2x10s to make it safe,
Yeah, sure.
but we had to fill that up.
Guess what?
You did too.
They made us do it too.
Yeah, I wanted to keep it so we could
Yeah,
use it.
there was
to
water in the
our
bottom of
yard.
it still.
Yeah.
It was beautifully
Yeah.
laid up, just perfectly
Yeah.
laid up.
Yep, and not only that, there's something else. There were cisterns that were made in like what had to be the Phalanx style, because at the front door of the Phalanx, my wife found this, the dirt was going down as they were doing all this work with the city improvements. And how would that be? When we dug around there a little bit, and sure enough, it was a brick-laid cistern.
Okay.
And they're what do you call it, bottle shaped. They're like
Yeah.
this.
You sure it wasn't
Yeah.
a septic tank? Seriously?
No, not a septic tank. No, these are cisterns. These are for water. And the water would come off the roof and then go in by pipe into these cisterns. Yeah, and I've seen several of them. There was one on the corner of, well, there are 2 of them there actually, corner of Congress Street. That'd be the northeast corner of Congress and Locust. And there were 2 houses there. 122, I think, was one of them. And then the other one was on the corner, but the 122 was next to it. And we were called over to look at that, and sure enough, it was a brick-laid cistern identical to 2 that we had in our backyard. And if you look at the pictures in the next room, you'll probably see a picture of it. We excavated that. And I had Billy Hutton go down and pull all the stuff out of it if there was anything there, and of course he got nothing. And that was puzzling, because usually if you got something like that, you throw all your junk in it. And no junk. And there was an opening from our basement straight into it. And I think that may well be the place where they harbored slaves in times of stress, when the national, what do you call them, the wardens, yeah, whatever they were, you know, the guys that went out and arrested people for harboring slaves. And by the way, Mapes had them stay in his hotel, so, and bragged about it, and bragged about turning them onto the booth, was lecturing at Berlin, and that's where they arrested him and took him to jail in Milwaukee. And later on got out. But don't praise D.P. Mapes over much. He did, you know, you can't argue the fact that he founded the city. I mean, there's no argument about that. But he was a rat.
In a word.
No, and the other personal item, when they tore down the Ceresco school,
Yeah.
my dear wife had the good idea, and because you could get some old bricks. We lined part of our driveway.
Oh, good.
And also, she had the idea, we got a lot of them were broken and chipped, but we got 3 nice ones, And we had plates put on for each of our 3 children,
Hey,
the years they attended.
really?
Oh, that was neat.
Yeah, great. Good for you. One more question.
Jack, it's often referred to as a socialist experiment, but it really wasn't, is that correct?
No, it was not socialistic. There was too much attention paid to how much work you did. And that if it were truly socialistic, that kind of thing would not be emphasized. They really were down to the minute as to how much time you put into any particular job, and they rated the different jobs. One job was worth more than another. Jacob Woodruff, being the blacksmith, was a high-tech guy. And so he got a big award.
block.
He got the whole block between Liberty, Locust, Cedar, and Park, a whole block. He got nursery stock besides that. He got his tools, and what else? Money. He got some money. Most of the at the dissolution, most of the what do you say? How people collected their dividends out of their investment was not in money. See, it's a very hard thing to figure, but these people were barters. They bartered, and so it took 10 years for all of these transactions to be completed. I mean, it was not until 1860 or even later that these were finally resolved. And the reason being that somebody traded 20 acres for another 20 acres somewhere else, or if it was poor land like over around the marshes in Rush Lake, they had 20 acres at Rush Lake. A lot of people didn't know that. But they would, if that would not be as valuable as land right, say, within the confines of the phalanx proper, and so that would be worth less, and so they would not be able to. Well, they'd get it. They wouldn't get as much out of it. Yeah, but that happened all over the place. There are lists of these transactions, and you could write a book just about the transactions. In fact, there was a guy wrote his master's dissertation at the University of Wyoming.
Oh, Mortensen?
Yeah, Al Mortensen wrote his master's dissertation on the Ceresco phalanx, the economics of it. And I'd say he's probably the most knowledgeable person in Ripon on the Ceresco phalanx, at least the economic aspects of it. And the whole master's dissertation on that.
How many acres did you say?
1,261.
1,200.
That was
So
at the utmost.
Where are kind of the boundaries?
Well, you'd be going well into Green Lake, well, probably to Green Lake County. Pretty close, yeah. And all that land up there on the west end, yeah. You'd be limited on the east end because that would be coming Ripon.
Yeah, but I thought I'd seen some pictures of me where the Ceresco had around the south side.
Yes, the south side to South Woods.
Maybe they stayed away from up here because there wasn't very good farmland. You know.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, you can't farm.
yeah,
it's hard to
yeah,
farm
it's
on
pretty
the
hilly, yeah, rocky too, because you get down a few feet here and it's limestone, yeah.
And did I miss it? How many people lived,
At
say
the-
in the third year when they had?
About 200 was a maximum.
About 200?
Yeah, yeah, it wasn't all that big.
How many were in Ripon at that time?
Well, I think by 1850, when there must have been a few hundred. I don't know exactly, but you could probably find out.
I can find out.
Ripon became a city in 54.
Yeah, 54, right, 4 years after the phalanx. It took them that long to resolve all the difficulties. You see these roads that are running at strange angles? Yes, well, that's because the Ceresco people and the Ripon people didn't, well, the Ceresco would not conform to the arrangement of roads and streets in Ripon. They said, to heck with you, you take our post office, you can lump it. They were kind of, you know, they had character.
Mapes didn't come and start the city till 1848, and Pedrick and
Yeah, we both.
Bell and these people, and so there was a tremendous influx of people between 1848 and 1851 was the
50
college.
51, the college, yeah.
Yeah, by this time, they already had enough people and resources to
Mhm.
put up the first
Yeah, that would be East Hall.
East Hall,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, imagine that in 3 years,
Mhm.
it started from,
Yeah.
no, but they had the population from Ceresco, but I don't think they were the contributors. I think these were newcomers that
Yeah,
came in.
I think mostly.
Mapes had,
Mhm.
he came in, built a hotel, I believe, and
Oh, yeah, right away. That was one of the
That
first
was-
things.
that was required of him by Horner, I believe.
Yeah, that was one of the agreements, yeah. Anything else? Thank you very much.